Everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to A Vintage Vanity. I am super excited for today's video because, well, you guys are here. And today we are doing another sewing video, though this is going to be a little bit different than our normal sewing vlogs. This time we are doing a step-by-step sewing tutorial for sewing up a full gathered skirt with, yeah, got it, pockets. Are you guys ready? I'm super excited. This is a really great project for beginners, for sewers that are just starting to sew their own clothes, and for those wanting to just dip the tip of their toe into drafting their own patterns, because this is pretty simple and straightforward, and honestly the only pattern that you're drafting is the waistband, and the only calculations we're going to do are three of them. We're going to do waist, we're going to do length, and we're also going to do like the circumference, the fullness of the skirt, and that's pretty much it. So on the math side, pretty easy. And what I like about this as well for creating your own first skirt kind of thing is the fact that the hem is really easy to do, because even though circle skirts are also very easy to sew up, it can sometimes be difficult doing the narrow hem on a curved piece of fabric. So this is super simple, and we are going to get into zippers, so I am going to be doing a little step-by-step on that as well. So with that, let's get calculating. We're going to start things off by drafting up the waistband. So the first thing we need is your waist measurement. Now there's a couple ways that you can get that. The first of which is actually measuring up your waist. You can do that the good old-fashioned way by taking out your measuring tape and placing that around your waist, and you want to make sure that is level all the way around the waist, and you want to be just above your belly button. Now I have a quick little tip to find where your natural waistline is, and that is to put your arms out to the side of you. Tilt your head up so you're looking up at the ceiling. You want to make sure that your legs are slightly apart, and while looking up at the ceiling, just put your hands at your waist. It's as simple as that, and where your hands end up is where your waistline is. Here's the thing, you guys. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I suck at taking my waist measurements. And I don't know if it's because I don't hold the measuring tape tight enough. I don't know if I'm not holding it in the right place. And quite frankly, I don't know if I'm just measuring it the wrong side of the day. So what I actually suggest doing sometimes, if you don't trust your measurement, is go and find a skirt that has a waistband that fits you perfectly. All you're going to do then is, typically you're going to want to do this on a flat surface, but you're just going to take it from side seam to the opposite side seam. Whatever that number is, you're going to go ahead and double it, and that, my friends, is your waist measurement. Now that we know our waist measurement, we can begin calculating out the length of our waistband pieces. And we will have a piece for the front and one for the back as well. But before calculating that out, we need to determine where the zipper is going to be. If it is going to be a side zipper, easy enough, because the front and back are going to be the same size waistband pieces. But for this design, since we are doing on-seam pockets, zipper is actually going to be in the back. So the back waistband pieces are going to be a different calculation. So let's first figure out that front waistband. And to do that, all we do is take our waistband measurement and we divide it by 2. Now, to complete that measurement, we also need to allow for seam allowances. So you're always going to put in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance at every point where the waistband is going to be stitched to something. So for our front waistband, we are going to be doing a stitch on both sides of the waistband. So we're going to be adding 5/8 of an inch to each side of that, which is the same as adding 1 1/4 inch to whatever our waistband measurement is. We have the length of our front waistband. The next measurement we would typically want is actually the width of the waistband, but before we do that, let's go ahead and figure out what the measurements for the back waistband are going to be. Now, we already know what the length of it is going to be if we just left it as one piece, but because we're putting that zipper up the center, you're going to take that number and you're going to divide it by 2. Once you have that number, once again, we need to accommodate those seam allowance, and on either side of that shorter back waistband, we are going to have a seam allowance, one for the side seam and one for where it attaches to the zipper. Those are both 5/8 of an inch, so once again, we add that together for 1 1/4 and add that to the length of our waistband. So now we have the length calculations for both the front and the back waistbands, so let's go ahead and figure out the width. For the width of waistbands, it really comes down to preference. I like my finished waistbands to be 1.5 inches wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that finished waistband measurement and we're going to double it, which gives us 3 inches. And the reason that we double it is that we are going to actually be folding over that waistband, so it will give it a facing on the waistband. And also when it folds over on the inside, it will actually encompass that waist seam, so we'll have a really nice finish inside the skirt. And before you finish that measurement, you're going to once again want to accommodate for your seam allowances. You're going to need to add seam allowance at the top and the bottom. So once again, we're adding 1 1/4 to our measurement, so that takes us from 3 inches to 4 1/4. And we now have our measurements for our waistband. So to create the pattern piece, you need a pen, some type of paper, and a ruler. This is hands down one of my favorite pieces in my sewing arsenal is this, I think it's a quilting ruler, but because it's transparent, you are able to line up things really easily. It just makes it super easy to make straight lines and straight marks and know that nothing is askew. Sewing hates being lopsided or askew. So the first thing I always do when creating my waistbands is I use the edge here to create basically a right angle. So I know that I have a perfectly straight line going in both directions, and that's kind of the base of what I start off of. So for our front waistband, we need that to be 20 1/4. So I'm just going to place this back over here, and I'm going to take that line and I'm going to go all the way around the corner here. So even though this is only 18 inches, I now have this line here. So now I know, because even if you're matching up at the top, sometimes your ruler can get a little skewed. So that way, what I'm doing here is I'm using that transparentness to line up that vertical line and then holding on to that and then lining up the horizontal line. So now I know that that is all a perfectly straight line. The width on this is 4 1/4 inches. So now all I'm going to do is, again, line up this horizontal line with my quarter mark. So 4 1/4 there. Again, that transparentness coming through. And then making sure I'm lined up on my vertical here. Do that. I'm going to do the same over here. And then I simply line up those 2 lines. Bam. And then I always label it. And then right below it, we do the same thing for the back waistband. You always cut 1 front, 2 back. I don't typically cut out my waistbands first, but because this has a very specific detailing at the top of the fabric that I want to make sure shows up on the waistband, I'm going to cut that out first. And I use my rotary cutter when it comes to straight edges. I find that it just is more efficient and makes better cuts than using scissors. And then I'm just going to go ahead and cut out 2 of the back waistbands the same way. Here's a quick tip. Any patterns that you're going to be drafting up, draft a master copy. And you want to do this in like thicker, nicer paper. You can even get like poster board from the dollar store to do this on. And what you do is you just draft up the pattern, but you never cut with that pattern, because you're going to find as you cut, and especially if you use a rotary cutter, eventually you're going to start to shave off a little bit of the pattern. I don't care how careful you are, it will eventually happen, and your pattern will warp. Or, you know, I don't know, you spill water on it, your cat barfs on it, something like that, it gets ruined. But if you have a master copy, that is the one that you can always transfer new copies with. That way you always have a perfect drafted copy of your waistband, and you never have to redraft it. I like that. There is one more thing we need to do with our waistband before we move on, and that is we need to cut out the interfacing. Essentially, interfacing is to give a more structure to the fabric, and with the waistband, you're always going to want to put interfacing in a waistband of a skirt or pants, because you don't want that waistband to like collapse on itself or fold over, and you also don't want it to stretch out over time, and interfacing will give it that extra strength. And I just use this light interfacing. It's made for apparel, and it is an iron-on. So essentially there's one side that is rough and scratchy, and that's the adhesive, and then there's one side that is smooth. So all you're going to want to do is essentially cut out your waistband, again, just using the interfacing. To apply your interfacing, you want to make sure that you are working on the wrong side of the fabric. Then you're going to place the interfacing down with the rough side facing the wrong side of the fabric. And you want to make sure your iron is on steam, and you're just going to place it on top and hold for at least 5 seconds. That will melt the adhesive. And I just like to flip it over and give it another quick iron just to make sure everything's nice and neat. This next step is completely optional. It's just what I happen to do on my waistbands. But what I do is I turn it over to the interface side, and on the side that is going to attach to the skirt, I'm actually going to mark my seam allowance. Then what I do is I flip it over onto the other side, and I'm going to chalk in my seam allowance on here as well. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over again, and I am going to iron my seam allowance, because this seam allowance here that I'm ironing is going to be on the inside, and it just makes it easier to do it beforehand. I'm going to kind of open that back up, and I'm going to fold this in half and iron. You should have a waistband that looks like this, that is all ready to be stitched onto the skirt. The last measurement we're going to need to calculate is the length of the skirt. And to determine the length is really going to be personal preference and, quite frankly, your height. So you can do it one of two ways. Once again, you could take your measuring tape and place it at your waist to determine how long you would like the skirt to be. Or you'll grab a skirt that you like the length of, you'll place your measuring tape at the seam of the waistband and bring it all the way down to the end of the skirt to determine the length of that skirt. Once you have that measurement, we will once again need to accommodate for seam allowance, but this time the seam allowance is only going to be up at the waistband. So we'll add 5/8 of an inch to that measurement. Then we need to accommodate for the hem, and how thick your hem is, and again, is all personal preference. I personally like to do 1.25 inches on my hem. So we're just going to take those two measurements, the 5/8 of an inch and 1.25 inches, and add those to our length measurement. Leaves me with a measurement of 27 7/8. One of the other reasons why I did it this way is I wanted to make sure I had as little of this just empty black space at the bottom as possible. So that way I can measure from the top for my length. So I'm going to start at 27 3/4 up here. Bring that all the way down. And then I am going to take my scissors and just do a small cut. Because now that I have that little cut there, all I'm going to do is, and this is this is going to be hard to watch probably, is I'm going to tear. Because the thing, especially with cottons and anything that's woven, is it's really easy to just clip and tear, and this is a great way to get your length. And you want to make sure you're doing it in small sections, because sometimes I find if you do an uncontrolled, really enthusiastic rip, it can go wrong. And just a note, this does not work with all fabrics, and you will want to test it to make sure, but it will work on pretty much all cottons. So now our panel length is perfect. Look how easy that was to cut for length. Love it. Now we need to figure out how full we want that skirt to be, because the fullness is going to dictate how gathered the skirt is going to be. Because essentially you're taking a large rectangle and then you're gathering that top down to your waist measurement. Typically, we're doing a 3-time gather or a 4-time gather. Basically is take your measurement and times it by that number, and that determines how long your fabric is going to be. Now, to give you an idea of what that looks like, I actually have a couple of skirts that I've done in different fullness, and the first that you're seeing here is a 3-time fullness skirt, and this is going to give you it's going to give you the vibe of like a half circle skirt. So you're going to get a little bit of fullness, but it's not going to be super full. And obviously the fuller the skirt gets, the more fabric you're going to have at your waistline. So that's something to keep into consideration as well. And then this next skirt that you're seeing here is a 4-time gather skirt. This one is probably like a 3/4 circle skirt. So not quite the full circumference of a circle, but it gives a really nice, lovely fullness to the skirt. So I will leave it up to you whether you want to create a 3-time or a 4-time gather skirt, because the math is exactly the same. You are going to need 2 measurements for your fabric, one for the front of the skirt and one for the back of the skirt. So to do the math, all you're going to do is you're going to take your waistband measurement, and that is with the seam allowances and everything, and you're going to times it by 3. Or you'll times it by 4. Then you're going to take your back waistband measurement, and you guessed it, either times it by 3 or by 4. I just want to pause and take a moment to look, especially at those measurements we calculated for the front panel. Because you will notice that no matter if I did the 3-time gather or the 4-time gather, both of those measurements were over 42 inches. Now, 42 inches is important because it's the answer to the universe. But also, it is the typical width from selvage to selvage of a bolt of fabric. Now, why this matters especially is on fabrics like this, where there is a direction, so you have to cut from selvage to selvage. Now, if it is not a directional print, you can definitely do it this way, lengthways, so the 42 inches is never going to be an issue. But the other consideration with this as well is that when you cut this way, your length, you're never going to utilize the full 42 inches for your length of the skirt. I shouldn't say never. Some people really like long skirts, but typically the length is not going to be that long. So you're going to end up with a lot of scrap fabric. So if minimizing your scrap waste is important for you, you're probably always going to want to be cutting selvage to selvage, because then, you know, your length is just how much yardage you get. Essentially, you are going to have to panel together 2 pieces of fabric to make up that full fabric panel for the front piece. And honestly, with a gathered skirt, you're really not going to see maybe if there's a seam down the center. So it's really up to you how you want to panel that piece together. The only thing that you really need to keep in mind is that when you are paneling 2 pieces together, wherever there is a seam, you need to add another 5/8 of an inch to accommodate that. Now, if you look at the calculation for a full-time gather skirt for the size that I'm working with, you will see that that is 81 inches. The fabric itself is 42 inches wide. So 2 panels of this is going to be a little over 81. I'm just going to take 2 of them and put them together. Yes, it's a little bit more than my calculation, but it's a gathered skirt. It's all going to kind of like work itself in, and it's not going to be a problem. If you're working with a border print where the print runs along the yardage length of the fabric, you're going to be able to cut that out as one panel, no problem. For panel width, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to measure across the top, give it a little snip, and then you'll be able to pick it up and tear. If you're like me and you're working with some vintage fabric that you found, so you're just working with the yardage that you have, and what I have here is a little bit more than 4 yards. So essentially, I have not enough to make a 4 gathered skirt, but I have more than what a 3 gathered skirt is. And I also want to utilize all of it. I don't want to have to cut any of it off. I want to live in its gloriousness. So what I want to do is I'm going to cut the panels evenly. So essentially all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the full length of fabric, and again, this is already cut to length. You saw me do that. So I am just going to join the 2 ends of the fabric. I'm just going to line it all up, basically just folding the fabric in half, folding it until I hit that center point. I'm going to clip and rip. I have my front panel piece. Oh, how cute is this? And then I'm going to take that other piece and basically do the same thing. I'm going to fold it, and then right where it's folded, I'm going to clip it and rip it. Carefully rip it. We have all the panels that we need for our skirt. So this is my beloved ruffler foot, and essentially how it works is there is a selection up here where you can change it to ruffle every 12 stitches, every 8 stitches, and every stitch. I choose to put it on every stitch because we're going to do a super full ruffle. And then it has a screw right here, and this screw tells it how deep to ruffle. So if I screwed it all the way down, it would ruffle super deep. If I unscrew it a little bit, right there, it will ruffle like medium depth, which is exactly what we want. So getting the fabric in here is a little bit different. You're not just going to put it right under there. Right here is kind of a center bar with 2 side bars. So you want to go over the side bar, under the center bar. Then we're going to slide our fabric back there. Now we want to make sure that you leave a little bit of room for the seam allowance back here. So we're not going to go to the complete end. And simply ruffle away. Now, I do go pretty slow on this to make sure it doesn't miss any ruffling. And the other thing is I always make sure that the fabric behind the ruffler foot is nice and loose so it doesn't have any problem grabbing hold of the fabric. Did I mention how much I love this thing? Now let's attach the waistband to the skirt. The first thing I do is actually fold the skirt over so that I can find the center point of the skirt. And when I find it, I simply place a pin in it. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the waistband, but instead of a pin, I am just going to snip a little slit. And what this allows me to do is match up the center points on the waistband to the skirt and make sure everything is evenly distributed. Then lay the 2 pieces right sides together and begin pinning. Now I always pin at that center point first, and then I go to the ends of the skirt and pin those as well. Again, this is just to make sure that everything is evenly distributed. Take that over to the machine and stitch it together using our chalk line as our guide. It's time to talk about pockets. So the easiest way to do this is actually to take a skirt or a dress that you already like the pockets on, and we're just going to replicate this pocket. Well, the first thing I'm going to do with my paper, because I want to make sure that I have extra edge, I'm going to actually just fold over my edge on this, and I'm also going to fold it over up here, because that will give me room to add to the pocket for seam allowances and things like that. And then we're just going to slide it underneath. And then I'm just going to take my pen and making sure to not draw on the pocket itself, I'm just going to sketch it out. And you can also take the pocket from like a favorite sewing pattern as well. That's always an option. Add our seam allowance up here. So we're going to go ahead and add 5/8 of an inch. We weren't able to get this all the way to the edge, so I'm going to go ahead and just add an additional inch on there. So that will be my seam allowance and anything I wasn't able to kind of like shove under. And then I'm just going to round this up. So now we have our pocket. You're just going to write on here, cut 4. So we'll need 4 pieces to do 2 pockets. I am going to change the way we're doing the pockets just to make a little bit easier. And what we're going to do is I am going to curve this in so it comes at a point here. So we're just going to curve that out, kind of like this. So we're not really losing any pocket space. We're just making it a little bit easier to attach onto the skirt. So they are trimmed down. I am going to take this over to the machine and serge it right on this edge as well, because this will not be inside of a seam. This is the only section that is going to be inside of a seam. So I'm going to show this on one of the back panels of the skirt. So essentially you're going to lay it down right side up, and then you're going to take one of the pockets, and I like to start the pocket right at the very top. So we're just going to pin that so it's going to meet the top of the waistband, and we're just going to pin the edges. So if you're using a regular sewing machine, you're just going to stitch from the bottom of the pocket to the top at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I am using the serger, so I'm going to actually stitch all the way from the bottom all the way through the top of the waistband, because that will give a nice finished edge to my fabric and prevent any fraying. And once again, if you're working on the sewing machine, once your side seams are all sewn up, the front and the back together, you can go ahead and pink the edges to make sure that you don't get any fabric fraying. So there we go. The pocket is all stitched onto the side. Now I will take this over to the ironing board and just iron that so it's all nice and flat. And then one thing to keep in mind when you're doing the back panels is that when you are placing the pocket on the other side, that you make sure you're not doing it where the zipper goes. Then we're just going to do the same thing and stitch the pocket on this side as well. And then the other 2 pockets will be sewn onto the sides of the front. Before we do anything else with the pockets, we're going to deal with the zipper. The zipper is going to be placed between our 2 back pieces here. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually serge the edges here to keep the fabric from fraying. Since our zipper is going to sit inside of our waistband, we need to trim the very top of it. I'm just going to take my pinking shears and clip. We're going to need to sew up the back seam of the skirt, but we need to determine where the zipper is going to start. So to do that, I'm just going to tuck my zipper up into the waistband and matching it up with the fold and just lining it up along the edge of the skirt so that I can determine where the zipper stop is at the bottom, and simply chalk a line, and that will indicate where to stop stitching my seam closed. We're going to pin those 2 back pieces together starting at the waist seam. Now, even though we're only going to be stitching from the hem up until our chalk mark, we do want to make sure that that area that the zipper is going to be in is nice and aligned. This is going to help make sure that when we put our zipper in, it doesn't misalign or get funky or weird. It's just going to make the whole process a lot easier. I'm just going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from the chalk mark all the way down to the hem. After that's stitched together, you're simply going to iron your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on each edge. I always pin my zipper in from the right side of the fabric, and I start by taking the very top of the zipper and nestling it into that fold of the waistband. And that's where I'm going to place my first pin. And then I just want to make sure to keep my fabric and zipper nice and taut You don't want to pull on anything, but you want to make sure that the two pieces are nice and smoothly lined up. The other thing is you want to make sure that the teeth of the zipper are lining up with the very, very edge of the fabric. Once I've pinned everything on the one side all the way down to the zipper stop, I will then go over to the other side and once again start at the top, nestling the top of the zipper into the fold of the waistband, and then repeating the process. I don't know that I have a ton of tips on actually sewing the zipper, but as you can see, I've gone ahead and replaced my sewing foot with my zipper foot. I do use the very edge of the feed dogs as my guide for my stitch line. And I do keep the pins in there until I'm just about to sew into them because I find it just keeps the zipper from moving around too much. And I also will kind of place my fingers in a way to make sure that the zipper doesn't wiggle around at all. Okay, so you're about to notice a difference from when I showed you the pinning of the zipper. And that is the fact that I actually only pin the left side of the zipper to start. I do recommend pinning both sides if you're just starting out with zippers, but I actually like to pin the right side after I've sewn up the left side. So you can see here that I'm reaching the bottom of the zipper. So I'm going to close up the zipper. Then I'm just going to redistribute the skirt fabric so that everything is laying nice and smooth. Then I'm going to continue to stitch down the length of the zipper until I get to the zipper stop. Once I get to the zipper stop, I'm going to kind of turn the fabric so that I can sew underneath it. I want to smooth out the fabric, and I also will meet up the zipper center there with the fabric so that everything is laying the way that I want it to look when the zipper is done. But here's the thing with the bottom of the zipper stop. I will actually count each stitch until I get to center. Usually it's about 3 stitches to reach center. But that way I know once I hit that center, I just have to go another 3 stitches and then I can turn the fabric again and begin to sew up the skirt. At this point, I just make sure my needle is in the down position, and then I am going to unzip the zipper about halfway and begin to pin the other side. Once again, I always start up at the very top, tucking the top of the zipper into the fold of the waistband, and then I'm just going to start to pin. Once I've reached the point where I've unzipped the zipper down to, I will stop pinning, but it is also at this point you're going to notice if there's something really wrong with your zipper. So if you have an excess amount of fabric or not enough fabric, you know that there's something a little askew in your zipper insertion. Which is great because then if you need to unpick things, you only have to take out the one side of the zipper. And then I leave the zipper closed and I just make sure to kind of hold the fabric in the zipper nice and firmly as I stitch up to my first pin. Once I reach that first pin, I can just open up the rest of the zipper and proceed to sew it up as I did the other side. There is nothing more satisfying than a good zipper. I always get so excited when it's time to attach the front to the back, and I think it's because we are so close to being done at this point. So to do this, all we need to do is lay the right sides together, and we are going to match up the seams on each side. I always start with matching the seam at the waistband and then just pinning down the rest of the skirt. Before we actually take it to the machine and stitch it up, I am going to make a few markings on the pockets because we are going to have to stitch around the pockets. From the bottom of the pocket, I'm going to measure up 1 inch and mark it. And then from the top of the pocket, I'm going to do the same thing. When we're sewing up the sides, when we get to the pocket area, we're no longer going to be able to see our guidelines on our sewing machine. So making the chalk markings allow me to know when I need to pivot in my straight stitch to start stitching around the edge of the pocket. Now we're simply going to stitch from the hem up to our first chalk line, pivot, stitch around the pocket, hit that other chalk line, pivot, and sew up through the waistband. And then we'll simply do the same steps on the other side. For the hem, I serge the end of it, and all I do is I fold up the bottom by 1.25 inches and stitch it down. Now, if you don't have a serger, what you can do is once you iron that 1.25 inch hem, you simply have to fold it in and then stitch so that your fabric edge is encompassed inside your seam allowance. Now that our hem is stitched and CAD approved, it is time to move on to finishing the waistband, which is our final step. All that prep work we did when we initially cut out the waistbands is what's going to make this part of the process go by really quickly, because everything is already ironed down. We simply need to fold the waistband over, making sure that the waist seam allowance is captured inside the waistband, and pin it down. Once that's all pinned down, we're going to go ahead and take it over to the machine. Now, I do want to make sure that the edges of the waistband are sewn down as well. So I always start on the short side of the waistband. I'll stitch down till I get to the seam of the waistband, and I'll pivot and then simply stitch in the ditch, which basically means just stitch in that kind of divot that's made from your seam allowance. This basically just serves to hide your stitch line. And then when I get to the stitching of the zipper on the other side, that's when I know to pivot and stitch up the other short side of the waistband. And then you are done. So let's see how this skirt turned out. I hope that you guys have found this video helpful and that it has inspired you to make all the gathered skirts that you can. I was so excited when I found this fabric, and now that I've turned it into a skirt, it is one of my favorite things that I have ever made. And honestly, I wanted to do this really in-depth tutorial on this style of skirt just because every time I looked online, I would find them, but they were always like shortened, quick, easy versions of them. They never had really good pockets or zippers, and this kind of encompasses everything. So I hope you guys found this incredibly helpful, and who doesn't love a fun and flirty skirt? So that is it. I hope you guys really enjoyed today's step-by-step tutorial. And of course, I love hearing from you. So go ahead in the comment section below and let me know what you thought of today's video. And of course, if you make your own gathered skirt, I would love to see it. So be sure and tag me on the social media so I can take a look at that. And of course, before I let you go, a huge subscriber shout out to Carol McCormick. Thank you so much for watching, liking, and commenting on my videos, and of course being a part of our cozy little online community. And if you liked today's video, be sure and click that thumbs up. It really does help with the algorithm. And if you're gonna miss this face between uploads, be sure and follow me on all the social media as a Vintage Vanity. If you want to keep watching more of my videos, well, there's a video right there for you to watch. And of course, if you don't want to miss anything that goes on, go ahead and click that subscribe button and hit those notifications so you're always notified of a new video. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.